that has been discussed, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and now yield 5 minutes to my friend from Texas, Mr. Chip Roy.
Thank the chairman, and I thank the chairman for hosting this important hearing as we close out this year and look ahead to next year in reconciliation. I appreciate the witnesses and I appreciate your time. Ms. Botcha, just a real quick question to follow up to the previous line of questioning. Do you think the IRA was, in essence, in effect, corporate welfare?
Yes.
Subsidies in significant numbers and amounts to large corporate interests?
Yes. Congress should repeal it.
Agreed. Thank you for your straight and blunt answer. I would ask down the line, irrespective of sort of party invitation. There is debate here about the impact of extension of TICJA. In other words, also retrospectively looking at the impact of TICJA in the first place. Obviously, the corporate part having now, is permanent. So now we've got TICJA non-permanent, and what's the impact? I firmly believe that tax policy has kind of two pieces to it. One is what money should morally be left in the pockets of the people in the first instance, and what does that mean for economic growth and so forth. And then on the second part is what do we have to do correspondingly with the revenue projections to not run deficits? And I think those two things have to go hand in hand. So my question for the panel, quickly, if you might, in a yes or no or close to yes or no format, is some on my side of the aisle would suggest that TICJA will pay for themselves, by themselves, irrespective of regulatory actions, other actions taken, and other forces at play. Is it your position and belief that TICJA, if just extended, will in fact pay for themselves? Yes or no?
As a percentage of GDP, no.
No.
No. No.
Okay. Do you, and so generally speaking, if that's the case, if we're going to extend TICJA, do we need to include additional measures that would either generate more revenue, maybe on the regulatory side, again, irrespective of one's views of the right regulations to adjust, on the regulatory side to produce economic growth for additional tax revenue based on that economic growth, or on the on the spending cut side? Would you agree that we would need either additional economic juice actions or spending cuts if we're going to minimize or reduce deficits? Yes or no?
Yes, and I think the metric has to be percentage of GDP, not nominal dollars.
Yes, we need both.
The tax provisions are pro-growth. We also need savings. They don't have to be in the same package necessarily.
Okay, but the question was, in order to achieve reduction in deficits, do we need to have corresponding, along with TICJA, will we need either additional economic juice in the form of regulatory action or otherwise, and along with that, spending cuts? Is that not mathematically true that we need that for deficits to reduce?
Yes, Congressman. To a large degree, but to the extent that you get economic growth, then you can sustain the debt burden without necessarily fully offsetting everything.
Right, but that's a different question, is it not?
It is.
Right, in other words, I would agree that if we say we're going to leave deficits exactly the same in perpetuity and grow the economy, that then we can manage that debt burden and that deficit as a percentage. But if deficits are going to continue to grow, and or even if they stay flat, deficits aren't going to go down. We are not going to reduce deficits without significant spending cuts and or some other significant levers for economic juice to get to the heyday of the 80s of a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7% economic growth in order to grow out of it, in order to get deficits into a manageable position. Do we have general agreement on that across the panel?
Yes, but you need huge institutional upgrades to get there.
Okay, and one last point. A lot of my colleagues will talk about how mandatory spending is the primary driver of our deficits. 70% roughly of the overall spending right now is roughly mandatory spending. Leaving, however, of course, 30% being discretionary spending. Am I not correct that both, given that that's a large chunk and piece of the pie, need to be managed, both discretionary and mandatory?
Yes.
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 Congressman, you need to manage at least one of those two pieces. You and your colleagues could choose to focus only on mandatory programs. That's not what I would recommend.
to you, but that is
Last
mathematically not.
question in my magic 5 minutes, I'll just go over just a few seconds, is in your all's experience, have you seen in recent memory any proposal on either side of the aisle or jointly to seriously address what we, I think, incorrectly call mandatory spending as opposed to, I call it automatic spending? But have you seen any serious proposals put forward with weight to address by spending cuts, by age changes, or anything else on a collective? Have you seen a press conference in the front of the Capitol with locking arms or any one side come forward to say that they have serious mandatory spending proposal changes?
No, but I've seen two process proposals that'll get us there. The Fiscal Commission Act, which you voted for, HCR 24, which the chairman introduced, and you ought to have I would respectfully suggest have a hearing in your subcommittee of judiciary and on the Constitution. But individual reform proposals, no. The process matters.
Understood, but in terms of, I mean, we're a legislative body and we have a free will and we can introduce legislation and we can get behind it with press conferences and action. Ms. Katcha, have you seen anything like that in recent memory?
No.
No.
Absolutely, depending on your views on it, the RSC budget proposal.
To a degree, and of course, then there's a massive amount of hammering for it, but has it been put forward to be advanced as the budget or the actual action by any serious weight of Republicans or Democrats?
No, sir.
Right. Sir?
Congressman, I'm not aware of anything that's come to a vote on the House floor that would substantially roll back benefits, except for the repeated votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which would have rolled back those benefits. It also would, if you repealed the whole thing in some sense, would have raised spending on Medicare and changed taxes and so on. But apart from the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, I'm not aware of any legislation.
I appreciate the honest answers in what I hope was trying to be presented in a bipartisan or nonpartisan questioning. I yield back.
I appreciate the line of questioning, and now yield 5 minutes to our colleague from Texas, Mr. Lloyd Doggett.
Well, thank you very much. As perhaps a unique pay-as-you-go progressive, I do not favor